All right, the Andes are the second highest mountain chain in the entire world, with peaks reaching close to 7,000 meters above sea level. The Andean highlands can be divided into four zones based on altitude. In the Quechua zone, between 2,300 and 3,500 meters above sea level, corn grows very well. In the Suni zone, between 3,500 and 4,000 meters, a range of crops indigenous to the Andes is grown. The most pertinent of these crops are a cereal called quinoa and root crops, including potatoes as well. The Puna zone, between 4,000 and 48,000 meters, or 4,000 and 4,800 meters, is an open grassland used for grazing llamas and alpacas. The high peaks of the Cordillera zone, above 4,800 meters, are not exploited for agriculture. To the east, the Andean highlands drop off rapidly into the Amazon rainforest, the archaeology of which unfortunately remains poorly understood. To the west, the Andes descend gradually to the Pacific coast. The coastal region is a barren desert, bisected by numerous rivers running down from the mountains. Agriculture is limited to the river valleys. The desert is also broken by lomas, which are patches nurtured by mist from coastal fog, where dense vegetation grows during the winter. The coast itself is remarkably rich in marine resources, including small fish, large fish, ocean birds, marine mammals, and shellfish, such as clams and mussels. The wealth of resources along the coast is due to the Humboldt Current, which we discussed earlier, which sweeps cool waters up the coast of South America, bringing nutrients to the surface. Again, the Humboldt Current is a current that brings the cool waters from the south up along the Andean coast, accounting for the remarkable wealth of marine resources in that area. Then we're going to talk about Giturero Cave, which is a site in the Andean highlands of Peru where excavations uncovered the earliest evidence of domesticated beans dating to 4,300 years ago. Excavations at Giturero Cave in the Andean highlands of Peru uncovered domesticated beans, which subsequently were dated to approximately 10,000 years ago. But it was not the beans themselves that were dated, rather it was the charcoal that was recovered from the same level as the beans. When one of the beans was dated directly using AMS, or accelerated mass spectrometry, radiocarbon dating, it turned out to be only 4,300 years old. Apparently, the beans came from a higher level in the stratigraphic sequence at Giturero Cave and were perhaps moved by burrowing animals. The redating of the beans from Giturero Cave has thrown all early dates for domesticated plants in the Andean highlands into question. At Ponolauca Cave, a small number of quinoa seeds have been found in layers dating to between 5,700 and 4,500 years ago. Until these seeds are dated directly, the timing for the domestication of quinoa remains open to question as well. The earliest evidence for domesticated potatoes from sites on the Peruvian coast dates to between 4,000 and 3,000 years ago. It is unlikely that these are the earliest domesticated potatoes, as the coast is not the region where wild forms of potatoes grow. An added problem is that distinguishing domesticated quinoa and potatoes from wild forms is extremely difficult. With quinoa, a thin seed coat means the grain is domesticated. With potatoes, the shape and size of the starch grains are used in order to distinguish between wild and domesticated forms. The domestication of llamas and alpacas in the Andean highlands is fairly well documented. Both animals are camelids. So llamas are camelid animals domesticated in the Andean highlands. Guanacos are the ancestral species of llamas. Alpacas are almost camelid animals as well, domesticated in the Andean highlands. And vicunas are the ancestral species of alpacas. It is difficult to distinguish between domesticated and wild camelids on the basis of the shape and size of their bones. However, at a number of cave sites in the Andean highlands, the percentage of camelids relative to deer increases steadily throughout the period between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago, a trend that appears to indicate a gradual shift towards camelid domestication. Beginning around 7,000 years ago, the number of very young camelids increased sharply. This pattern is interpreted as the result of disease which struck closely packed herds of domesticated animals. Another line of evidence for the domestication is found at the Asana site near Lake Titicaca In a level dated to 4,500 years ago, chemical analysis of the soil indicated that there had been a high concentration of dung in an area surrounded by post holes. The excavators interpret this feature as the remains of a corral for domesticated camelids. The other domesticated animal in the Andes is the guinea pig. Little is known about when guinea pigs were first domesticated, but appears to have been considerably later than camelids. No village sites from these early periods have been excavated in the Andean highlands. Currently, it appears the domestication of plants and animals took place in the context of mobile hunter-gatherer societies. And again, Paloma, which we'll get to, we'll see, is a pre-agricultural village site on the coast of Peru. By 8,000 years ago, small settled villages had developed in the Loma fog meadows on the Peruvian coast. The inhabitants of these villages were hunter-gatherers who relied heavily on the rich coastal marine resources, and so these are coastal villages. The village of Paloma, which was inhabited intermittently between 8,000 and 5,000 years ago, provides a broad view of one of these early pre-agricultural villages. Houses were built of reeds and grasses over a structure of wooden poles. The total population of the villages is unclear, but it appears to have been in the range of 10 families at any given time. A large number of burials were excavated at Paloma, mostly in pits dug into the floors of the houses, with grave offerings placed near the skeleton. An analysis of the burials demonstrated that an overall uniformity in the treatment of the dead, although males tended to be buried toward the center of the houses, suggesting that they might have had a higher status than that of females. The Paloma site provides a vivid demonstration of the centrality of marine resources to these early village communities. Analysis of the faunal remains from the site showed that 98% of the individuals recovered were marine animals and shellfish. The dominant species were anchovies. Only a small number of land mammals remains were found. These include spider monkeys, camels, and deer. Camelids. The skeletal remains also afford evidence of the intensive exploitation of marine resources at Paloma. 8 skeletons were found with auditory echostosis, a growth in which the inner ear caused by spending long periods in cold water. Burial 159 at Paloma presents particularly graphic evidence of the relation of these people and what they had with the sea. Burial 159 is a young man in excellent health except for a missing leg. This man was buried in an elaborate cane structure tied with cord, along with a number of burial offerings. A series of cut marks was found on the man's pelvis, indicating the likelihood that his leg was removed by a shark. A wide range of plant resources from the llamas, include seeds, fruits, and tubers, was exploited by the people living at Paloma. The only clearly domesticated plants were cultivated gourds. Beans and squash might have been cultivated, but there is no evidence that they played a significant role in the diet. Of course, approximately 5,700 years ago, large sites with monumental architecture began to appear on the coast of Peru. These belong to a period called the Cotton pre-ceramic, which is the period beginning 5,700 years ago when sites with monumental architecture flourished on the coast of Peru. In recognition of the prevalence of cotton seeds and the absence of pottery, of course, the sites from the Cotton pre-ceramic reach up to 58 hectares at El Paraiso and 65 hectares at Corral. At the site of Aspero, a large flat-topped pyramid known as Huaca de los Idolos is dated to between 5,500 and 4,500 years ago. At Carl, there are 6 large artificial mounds, the largest of which measures 160 meters by 150 meters and is 18 meters high, dated between 4,000 and 3,500 years ago. There has been considerable debate concerning the economic basis of the large cotton pre-ceramic sites. Again, because of the site of Aspero is located on the coast, it has been suggested that these sites were based on fishing and collecting marine resources rather than on agriculture. Subsequent studies have shown that, in fact, the bulk of the diet of cotton pre-ceramic sites, especially the locations of these pyramid and pre-ceramic mounds, consisted of fish and shellfish. Even at the site of Corral, located 23 kilometers from the coast, almost all of the faunal remains recovered were of clams, mussels, anchovies, and sardines. However, at both Corral and the coastal site of El Paraiso, a wide range of domesticated plants, including gourd, squash, chili peppers, and beans, as well as the tubers Achira and jicama, was grown. The dominant crop species was cotton, which was used for making nets and textiles. And then we have El Nino. El Nino is a severe reversal of the Humboldt current that causes a massive decline in marine resources along the Andean coast. The Humboldt current, which brings cool waters down from the south up along the Andean coast, is responsible for the wealth of marine resources that allowed villages such as Paloma to thrive without agriculture. The large centers of the cotton pre-ceramic also relied heavily on the rich marine resources brought by the Humboldt current. El Nino is a severe reversal of the Humboldt current that occurs every 25 to 40 years. When major El Nino events strike, there is a massive decline in fish populations on the coast, as well as torrential rains on the shore, which cause massive flooding and mudslides. It is hard to imagine how villages like Paloma would have survived such events. Studies of the fish found on archaeological sites have led scientists to argue that El Nino events began only around 6,000 years ago. According to this model, El Nino events between 6,000 and 3,000 years ago were less frequent than they are today. The onset of El Nino appears to correlate with the beginning of the cotton pre-ceramic. And so it is possible that the climatic uncertainty of the arrival of El Nino played a role in pushing the development of large centers with a partial reliance on agriculture. And so the domestication of plants and animals in the highlands of the Andes appears to have had little impact on the way that people lived. Early agricultural sites are either small cave sites or open-air ones, with little evidence of architecture. However, the absence of early agricultural villages in the highlands might be the result of a bias in the types of sites that have been excavated. Archaeologists have focused largely on dry cave sites with well-preserved organic remains. On the coast, settled villages preceded the adoption of agriculture. These villages were small collections of huts showing little evidence of social inequality. The adoption of domesticated plants took place on the coast in the context of increased settlement size and the emergence of monumental architecture. Because of the availability of rich coastal marine resources, agriculture played only a minor role in the subsistence of cotton pre-ceramic settlements. The dominant crop was cotton, used for making fishing nets and textiles. The adoption of agriculture on the Andean coast might have been a reaction to the climatic uncertainty introduced by the onset of El Nino. All right, and so next we'll talk about East Asia. We'll talk about China and agriculture.